Hey everybody, Radical Dreamer Steve, back at you with another video, and today we're checking out 10 of the best Game Gear games and how well they hold up. I should note, I've never actually really played a Game Gear before. Yes, I played sort of Hyja a bit on the 3DS, and I played the Power Strike or Aleste games on the collection for the Switch, but I'm pretty much unbiased. I never had this console growing up. I've only played one in my hands. One time a few years ago, it was just a friend's modded console. Can't even remember what game I booted up on it. One thing I want to note before we actually start is that I cut out some Sonic games. So while this is an unbiased list, I didn't want to have like 6 Sonic games make the list. That would be kind of boring. So I only included 2 Sonic games, the 2 that seemed to get the most votes. The way I found the games is I scrolled through the first pages of Google and wrote down every game I saw appear in a top 10 list, and I just tallied up the ones that were mentioned the most. Unofficial, but these are some of the most popular games for the console. Game number 1 is Baku Baku Animals. I had never heard of this game before until this list. It is a puzzle game, kind of like Tetris, where like little blocks of food fall down. So you'll see like carrots and dog bones, and every food correlates to one color, which will match to an animal. For instance, the dog bones are blue. So when you get a blue dog square and you put it next to a bone or multiple bones, the dog will eat all of those bones, eliminating those tiles, and you can create chains this way. This was a surprisingly fun game. It's the first game I played, and I really enjoyed it. It's simple to play, but it's hard to build really big chains, and the game gets progressively harder when you're playing on one player. I actually would say I recommend this one. I had a ton of fun. I don't have a lot to say about it because it's a pretty basic puzzle game, but I tend to like puzzle games. This game's probably a bit underrated on the console, and yeah, it's a really fun game. This game should be ported to a modern console. I would buy this for like $5-10, sure. Game number 2 is an RPG called Crystal Warriors. This is kind of a mix between a strategy RPG and a turn-based RPG. And before you play this game, you should note there's like almost no story. The game starts with this kind of like little script scrolling down the screen, and then you're immediately thrust right into a battle. There's nothing. You're just in the middle of the battle. There's no tutorial, no story. You're just in the battle. That's how the game starts. It felt familiar in that it's a grid-based game, but it took me a few minutes to figure out like how I see what my characters actually are. Because when you like are in the overworld on the battle, you can't really check their HP or their class or anything. Like this is pretty old school, and it had a very indie feel to it. Like the character design was really cool, and the battle animations were pretty adorable, despite being kind of weird. When you run into an enemy on the actual battlefield, you'll engage in turn-based combat, and you have 2 turns to either defeat the foe or they defeat you. And if that doesn't happen, it'll say unresolved, and it just goes back to the grid-based combat. I don't know. It's not a bad game. It feels very basic. It doesn't really seem to live up to a lot of the better games in the genre, especially for someone who's played a lot of games in the genre like myself. I think this is one of those games that you probably would have to have a lot of nostalgia for to really enjoy. Now, I will say, before closing out on this one, I hear the sequel Royal Stone is much better, but I've never played that. So I rate this a pass unless you really feel like you need to play every strategy RPG ever made or just love the Game Gear. Okay, next up is Gunstar Heroes, and it's our first Genesis port. Yes, a lot of Game Gear games were scaled down ports of their Genesis counterparts. This is very similar to the Genesis version. I gotta say, I like this game on the Genesis. This is gonna be heresy to a lot of people, but I don't actually love Gunstar Heroes. And I don't love a lot of Treasures games. Like I find them interesting, experimental, but I'm rarely like a huge fan of Treasures games. And I know that's going to be heresy to a lot of people. I know Treasures like a very, very dear company to a ton of people out there. So, I don't know. Gunstar Heroes on the Genesis is cool, but I've never liked it as much as something like Contra. Not to mention the Game Gear version, there's tons of screen flicker, and it's pretty difficult. Like, I don't know. I can never beat the levels in this game. It's fun enough, but I'm not sure why anyone would want to play this over the Genesis version. It's just harder to control, smaller screen, 8-bit instead of 16-bit. There's nothing to really gain here. Definitely obsolete in 2022. Next up is Mickey Mouse Land of Illusion. This is a 2D scrolling platformer. Again, I'm going to say this a lot. I have noticed I have zero nostalgia for the Mickey Mouse games since I grew up with a Super Nintendo. I have always wanted to try Castle of Illusion. I hear it's a really awesome Genesis game, and it looks really neat, and I like the animation. It looks absolutely beautiful. Like Disney and Sega did an amazing job with the animation. But here we are with the lesser-known sibling, Land of Illusion. The controls are decent enough, the animations are kind of cute, and the levels are pretty much as you'd expect, side-scrolling, but they also go up and down, and sometimes left, so they're a little bit sandboxy, I guess. I don't know. I didn't really have fun with this game, to be honest. I think that it's okay, like, it's not committing any really big fouls or anything, but I don't know, I got really stuck multiple times, and I just didn't really have fun with it, so it's not my cup of tea. It's okay, but again, unless you have a lot of nostalgia for it, probably better just to play Castle of Illusion on the Genesis. Next up is Power Strike 2, or as I know it, GG Aleste 2. Yes, I have played the touched-up version of this game on the Aleste version on the Switch, and M2 did quite a bit of work to reduce stuff like screen flicker and slowdown, and I was curious to see how the original Game Gear version would play, and despite some screen flicker and some occasional slowdown, this is such a good game. It really holds up. I mean, I really can't believe that this fast-paced balls-to-the-wall shoot-'em-up runs pretty much perfectly on the Game Gear, and it is pushing the hardware, really. I mean, this game, I'm mind blown this game can even run on the Game Gear. Like, this could be a Genesis game with how fast and intense it is. I guarantee you're not going to find anything like this on the Game Boy. It doesn't exist. So seriously, this is a really fun game. It's the only game in the series to feature bombs. Pretty cool soundtrack, too, for the Game Gear, and just a ton of fun. I feel like the difficulty is perfect in this one. While the first Game Gear Aleste is really easy, but still fun, this one's quite a bit harder without feeling difficult. Like, I beat this game on the Switch, and if I can beat a shoot 'em up, then it's not that hard. So I rate this a must-play for Game Gear fans and shoot 'em up fans. Probably my favorite Game Gear game, to be totally honest. Okay, next up is another Genesis port, Ristar. This is actually the game that I saw voted in the most top 10s for the Game Gear outside of Sonic games, which really disappointed me because I don't really like Ristar on the Genesis. I'm just not a big fan of this game. I'll give you the pros first. This game runs really well, the colors really pop, it's a pretty beautiful game, even on the Game Gear, and the gameplay feels virtually the same as the Genesis to me. It's okay, it's kind of wonky. I feel like I grew up with the Nintendo platformers, and they're all kind of perfected. They feel like they're perfected to be just masterclass games. Well, I feel like other than Sonic, and even Sonic to some extent, to be honest, the Genesis and Sega platformers were always a little bit wonky, experimental, and out there. And yeah, there is some charm to that, and they're kind of cool, but ultimately, Ristar feels a little bit disjointed, like the gameplay is constantly changing. And I don't know, I never liked this game on the Genesis. I know a lot of people are probably going to be like, dude, this is such a great, underrated platformer, and probably is. It is. I don't hate the game, it's okay. I can play it in small bursts, but yeah, if you like Ristar on the Genesis, this is actually a surprisingly competent port. I'll say that. Next up is Sonic the Hedgehog. Be careful here, this is a little bit different than the Genesis one, despite having the same name. And honestly, I don't know, this was actually the game that got the most votes for Best Sonic Game. I'm kind of surprised, because Sonic 2 on the Genesis is way better than the first Sonic game on the Genesis, at least in my opinion. And so I'm really surprised that Sonic the Hedgehog is considered the best Game Gear entry. So if you don't agree with that, please let me know, because I don't know much about the Sonic games on the Game Gear. Anyway, getting into this game. It starts off kind of like its Genesis sibling. You have no spin dash, it's just Sonic, and you even start out in the Green Hill Zone with kind of a toned-down 8-bit version of the classic music. Really good start to the game. Really enjoyed seeing Green Hill on the Game Gear. It's a lot easier than the Genesis version. It feels pretty fast. There's some slowdown for sure. Overall, I liked it. It didn't blow my mind. Like, I don't think this is going to be a contender for Best Sonic Game, but definitely playable, pretty good, and yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of surprised that Sega hasn't really re-released these Sonic games often. I know that they're on the 3DS, which is cool. You can get them like $4 or something, but really they should make a Sonic compilation for the Switch or something, because I feel like these games are probably kind of underrated. I enjoyed this game enough. I played the first 3 or 4 zones, and yeah, I had a lot of fun. Wasn't perfect, but competent Sonic game. I'm using competent way too much. Okay, next is Streets of Rage 2. I was not super excited for this since it's basically, again, a watered-down port of the Genesis game, and in this case, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, there are some slight differences here and there, but this is basically Streets of Rage 2 with half of its glory. Plays well, there's no slowdown, no sprite flickering that I noticed, so did a really good job on the port. The music also seems really intact, which is really cool. Doesn't sound nearly as awesome as the Genesis version with that sound chip, but still pretty rockin' tunes for kind of like chip tunes on a Game Gear. I did find it harder to do the combos in this game. I don't know, it didn't feel quite as smooth to me as playing the Genesis version. And while it's an admirable port, I don't really think this is worth playing over the Genesis version in any scenario. Alright, game number 9 is Tails Adventure. This was actually the game I was the most curious about. I heard, okay, a game featuring Tails. It's not a typical Sonic game, it's kind of a Metroidvania made on the Game Gear. Like, what? Cult classic? Like, this has my name written all over it. It sounded cool, but I have to admit that it was mostly a letdown. I like the concept, but, to be totally honest with you, the levels were all kind of ugly, and I don't know, I see like caves and lava. And I don't know, I wanted to see those really bright popping Sonic colors, and it felt like I was just stuck in these like dingy environments that weren't appealing. Next, Tails walks really, really slow, and the combat is just weird. I don't know, Tails is like throwing bombs and hitting enemies with a hammer. It feels kind of clunky. It's not a terrible game. I think this is one that could grow on me if I played it for a few hours, but I'm not sure that I would have the patience to appreciate it, and I don't think it's worth spending my time on over other games. So give this one a try if you're curious, but probably the only people that are going to really love this game are the really diehard Sonic fans. The final game is Shining Force Sword of Heija, or Heija. No one's going to know how to say that unless you're Japanese. No idea. This is the only game I had really played in its original form. I bought the 3DS version many years ago and tried it out. I overall like this game. I think it's a pretty cool little RPG on the Game Gear. The biggest problem with it is that it's a direct sequel to a previous Game Gear Shining Force game that never made it to the West. So the story just sort of starts right in the middle of some conflict that you don't have any idea about what's going on. The story is not overly complicated. As you keep playing the game, stuff's going to start making sense, but I don't know, just such a weird choice to release only the second half of the whole game. But the combat is where Shining Force really excels, and this game has really good combat. It's just like any other Shining Force. You have really fun grid-based combat, many classes, promotions, the animations still look good. And yeah, when I played it on the Game Gear, played the beginning of it, it didn't feel much different than the 3DS version I had played many years back. So I think this is definitely a decent game to check out if you're really into the Game Gear. However, to be totally honest with you, you might as well just play Shining Force CD, which includes upgraded versions of both of the Game Gear games, including the one that didn't make it to the West. And yeah, that's the version I would go with. So again, kind of another game that's not bad, but doesn't really hold up. Okay, so in conclusion to my playing the 10 of the best Game Gear games I'd never played before, except for Shining Force, it was an interesting experience in a totally mixed bag, to be honest. The first thing I noticed is that the colors blew my mind. I really didn't know that the Game Gear had these vibrant colors. Like, yes, I'm not playing it on the original hardware, but I really can't imagine wanting that disgusting monochrome Game Boy over the Game Gear back in the day. Of course, the Game Gear had something like 300 games, while the Game Boy had over 1,000. So yes, there's definitely more hardware in the Game Boy, but physically, the Game Gear just blows it away in terms of the hardware, other than the fact that it sucks batteries faster than a smartphone in a video call. Overall, I appreciate the Game Gear. I think it's a really neat piece of hardware, and it's probably been overly maligned and a bit overlooked. I think that there's probably a number of great titles for it, but the abundance of watered-down Genesis ports and kind of clunky RPGs and platformers that don't hold up really well compared to modern games just make this system more kind of a collector's dream and something that only a certain subset of the gaming population is really, really going to be able to appreciate. That said, I hope Sega does make more of the Game Gear library accessible in the future. Alright guys, so what are your favorite Game Gear games? Do you think there's anything else I should have played that didn't make the list? If so, please let me know. Maybe I'll do a Game Gear Part 2 video later. That's it for me. Game on, and catch you next time.